Warning. Some viewers may find this content disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. What was the creepiest or most paranormal thing that's ever happened to you? Creepy for me. I was having a tense conversation with someone that I was close to years ago. The conversation quickly devolved into a passive-aggressive fight that ended with the other person getting in the car and driving away. As I started heading back inside, the other person came back, got out of the car, and started our conversation again. The tone of voice was totally different and the stance was different and the feeling in the air was completely off. I don't know how else to explain it. As the conversation progressed, the other person started saying some nasty and mean things that were completely out of character. I said, "This isn't like you, person." They said, "What makes you think that I'm person?" I remember continuing the conversation and talking to the person for a long time, but I don't remember anything specific. I do remember becoming more and more alarmed and knowing something wasn't right. Finally, I told the person to go home. They complied and left. I went back inside and started telling my sibling about the situation when the doorbell rang. Maybe 2 to 3 minutes had passed. It was the person coming back to apologize for the original fight. They had been driving around town for a long time and didn't want to go home, leaving things unresolved. I asked why they had said some of the things from the last conversation and they looked at me like I was crazy. They had no idea what I was talking about. Totally could have been lying, but that whole situation just felt dark. Scared the hell out of me. I was a manager of computer repair for a retailer a couple years ago. We had a client's computer in the back running various malware and virus scans. I was doing morning paperwork in the back near the computer. This PC had its screensaver on displaying random photos from the My Pictures folder, various family members, children's birthday parties, the usual stuff. Then I swear to God I saw a picture of a woman from the shoulders up with her throat cut. As soon as I realized what I was making out, I directed my full attention and it was back to photos of a car show. As the day went on I thought nothing of it and proceeded to continue my work until I was bringing another customer's PC to the back to work on, and again from my peripheral I could have sworn I saw a bloody body bound in a trunk of a car. At that moment I began to freak out. I grabbed one of my employees, explained to him the situation. We then sat for 10 minutes and watched this screensaver. It is against company policy to search through the client's personal files without absolute just cause. We then proceeded to see a photo, 2 bodies in a shallow grave out in the woods and another photo of a severed hand down in kitchen drawer. I then went and got the general manager and informed him of the situation and had him view this screensaver. We then felt that it would be in everyone's best interest to contact law enforcement. In about 15 minutes later, owner of the computer and another gentleman show up. I proceed to tell him that his computer is not ready and it will be a while. He then informs me that he was called there because someone reported there was some photographs of a grisly murder that we had found. I showed him his computer and then his partner then begins to laugh at him. Apparently he went against police policy and took some of his work home with him and had never noticed his work photos were being used as a screensaver. I was living with my now mother-in-law in a house she had just purchased a few months before. We had all had various weird feelings or experiences in the house, but 2 really stick out. Collectively, there were 3 dogs living in the house at the time. One evening we are all sitting with our backs to the hallway, this is significant, watching a movie. All of a sudden my German Shepherd and my Terrier both perk up their ears and start staring down the hallway behind where we are sitting. I mean, full attention. I notice and turn around, the light in the hall was off, it was dark, but of course don't see anything. 5 minutes later, they're still staring and now growling. This time my wife and I turn around and we both watch as the light switch on the wall gets flipped to on. Dogs went crazy and so did we. A few weeks later, same scenario, light is off and we are watching a movie. My German Shepherd loved to play fetch and we always had a million balls around to entertain her. This time, she's staring down the hallway and wagging her damn tail. This time, we all notice again and start to watch. I swear to God, a ball, single orange tennis ball came rolling down the hallway towards her. We all went white. There were a few others, but Jesus, I hated that hallway. It never felt like a bad energy, but my feeble little brain was still scared nonetheless. Edit. One more story. My mom-in-law was having these dreams a few weeks after moving in about the house catching on fire and burning to the ground with us all inside. Horrible. About 3 weeks after these dreams, we woke up one morning and distinctly smelled smoke coming from the house somewhere. Panicked, we all started searching and eventually came to the garage. On a rafter, we noticed a smoke coming out from around a fluorescent light fixture. At that moment I realized, my God, it's attached directly to this old dried-out beam. The light was left on all night and it was clearly burning the rafter ever so slightly. Lights are not supposed to be secured/screwed onto a rafter like that. So we like to think our ghost hosts were looking out for all of us. After that, her dreams stopped. Thanks, Ghosty. Not creepy, but definitely paranormal. I was about 17, and was in my bedroom crying my eyes out over something. Home could be difficult at times, and that evening I was really upset. I really needed someone to talk to, but the only phone in the house was downstairs where my parents were, so calling a friend wasn't an option. I didn't know what to do to deal with the crap I was trying to live with and really felt that it couldn't go on for much longer. I remember thinking, please, someone, just help me. Not a prayer as such, I'm not really sure if that does any good, more sort of a mental scream into the void. There was definitely no one in the room with me. It was a tiny room, and I had my back to a chest of drawers. And then I felt a something on my left shoulder, as if someone was standing behind me and resting their hand on me. I could feel the weight of each individual finger, and the palm cupping my shoulder, and I could feel warmth from it. It didn't scare me, but it was enough to stop me crying. I guess the feeling lasted for a minute or so and then just stopped. I have no idea what it was, but it was enough to calm me down. I wish I could feel it again. I shared a room with a guy in college who was a musician. He'd stay out late almost every night and come home around 3 or 4 in the morning. Our room was a straight shot-through kitchen from the front door. One night I woke up to the bedroom door opening and figured it was just my roommate coming home after a gig. I thought it was strange that he turned the light on when coming in. He knew I was a light sleeper and would normally use his phone's light to shine around the room if he was looking for something while I was asleep. My bed was twin-sized, positioned against the wall connecting the bedroom to the kitchen. When he came in, I was facing the wall. I kept my eyes closed and pretended I was still asleep because I didn't feel like having a conversation with a most likely drunken friend while I was still half asleep. I heard him go to his side of the room, opposite of my bed, and rustle around his desk and dresser looking for something. Sometimes he would grab some clothes for the next day and go stay at a buddy's house, so I wasn't concerned. Then I felt him start reaching under my bed. I kept a few things under there, but he would normally ask before straight up taking anything of mine. At that point I was really confused and annoyed by all this, so I made it a point to, aggressively roll over on my other side and face the middle of the room and the direction from where he was reaching, so he knew I was pissed that he was ruining my beauty sleep. Then I heard nothing, but I could feel he shot up from under the bed and was just standing there. I never opened my eyes, but I figured he would either apologize for waking me up or something. But he never said a word. He just stood there. After probably 2 minutes with the light still on, I heard him leave the room and go to the kitchen. I opened my eyes after a couple more minutes because he left the light on in the bedroom. He wasn't in the kitchen, but he had pulled a knife from the knife block and left it on the table. I checked around the house and couldn't find him, but quickly realized my Xbox, book bag, wallet, etc. were stolen. I called my roommate to see if he had been home, but he was miles away at a party. He still had his house keys and never gave them to anyone else prior. I must have accidentally left the door unlocked that evening, which was the one time someone decided to check the knob. Police never followed up with me after that night, so I doubt they ever caught the guy. I can't imagine what would have happened if I ever did open my eyes and see that guy standing there, or if I chased him out to the kitchen. We lived in a house a few years back, and random things would just go missing, then they'd turn up somewhere else. We never really thought hard on it cause they were never expensive or important things, so because of this none of us ever mentioned it to each other. Fast forward and Mom loses an earring. Not a huge deal, but it's nice dangly pair she wears frequently. Maybe a month later I come home and find it perfectly laid out in the middle of the ground at the end of a high-traffic hallway. It has 3 doors at the end. Take a photo and show Mom when she gets back, give her back her earring, and we discuss the oddity. I mentioned that lately I've been misplacing random inconsequential stuff like staplers, and she looks at me and she goes, "That's weird." Me too. Our housemate gets home and we mention it and he goes, "Oh man, so weird. My razor vanished for a while and I found it back on my sink one day." So basically we're all convinced there was a friendly ghost attached to that house that just misplaced things to let us know they were present. My boyfriend and I woke up in separate parts of the house in hysterics, naked and covered in sweat. When we both finally calmed down and talked, we realized we had the same dream of being surrounded by a group of black and white people with no mouths. I am from the Indian town of Bhubaneswar. I have never quite believed in supernatural or anything outside the purview of science. This creepy incident happened the time my grandmother died. Being a traditional family, we performed numerous rituals for her so-called heavenly abode to be pleasant. Most of these rituals don't make sense to me, nor do they do now, but I decided against questioning as the timing was gloomy and everyone was mourning. One of these rituals was the preservation of lights inside a closed container. As part of the ritual, her kids, which included my father, are supposed to make a journey taking her corpse from Bhubaneswar to the holy city of Puri, around 50 km, where the Jagannath temple resides, and her sons are supposed to burn her there, perform the puja and set the ashes on its path to the Bay of Bengal. Meanwhile, there will be a container placed in our home in her room where she used to live, which will be filled with sand up to a certain level, and a lighted earthen lamp is supposed to be put, and the whole container will be covered completely, and the room is locked from outside for no one to enter the room till the sons arrive back to home and then unlock the room. Apparently there are supposed to be shapes formed on the sand which will tell the path that she will take to the heaven. I was also told that when my grandfather died, the shape formed was that of a ladder, which was interpreted as him going to heaven in a ladder or steps. I of course thought all this was pure idiocy and didn't believe it. Cut to when my father and his brothers returned from the holy city of Puri, and the room was unlocked and the container was opened after that, and what I saw surprised and creeped me out. I could clearly see wheel shapes being formed on all the sides of the earthen lamp, called deep in my language. The wheel shapes were not barely visible. I even took a photo. They were clearly visible. Grandmother lighting setup pic. It still creeps me out how that is possible. As a child I moved around a lot, army brat, and I insisted that every house I moved to was haunted. Nothing major ever happened, just weird noises, opening doors, things being in places that makes no sense. It wasn't until my second year at uni that I clocked on that I was haunted, not the houses, after my housemate suggested it. Anyway, last year I was on the way to my uni house from my job at a bar at about 3 a.m. To get into the house you have to walk down a privately owned alleyway. Just as I reach the entrance to this alley, a man runs up behind me and spins me around. He's clearly had a bit too much to drink and starts trying to grab me, touch me up and convince me to remove my t-shirt. Naturally, I'm very uncomfortable and scared. I remember that the window to the house had an alarm that went off if the window was hit. I figured if I could get down the alley and hit the window, my 2 male housemates would wake up and help. Only issue, every time I walked down the alley he'd grab me again. After maybe 5 minutes of a struggle, the man hit me. Next thing you know, the alarm on the window goes off, waking up my housemates and scaring off the man. Next day the police were called. We gave them access to the CCTV footage at either end of the alley. The man was caught on tape, but, since most of the incident occurred in the alley, there was not enough evidence to charge. Later that day, my housemates and I decided to check the footage to see what caused the alarm to go off. There was nothing. No bird, cat or any other animal. The alarm just went off. This had never happened before and didn't happen any time after either. I'm convinced it was my ghost. It used to freak me out, but I'm kinda glad it's around now. My brother and I were home alone one night watching TV. My mother was working a night shift and father was out. Father came home and pushed the door ajar and poked his head through to say hello. We both turn around and say hello back. Father closed door. 30 seconds after, another man opens the door to say hello. We both turn around and say hello back. Man closes door. We assume a friend of my father has come back to the house too. Anyway, about 5 minutes later I head into the kitchen where my father was, making dinner or whatever, and I'm expecting to see his friend again. I see that he's alone making dinner and assumed his friend was upstairs in the bathroom. I ask my father who his friend is. My father looks at me and asks me, what friend? I reply, the guy who came back with you. Dad looks at me thinking I'm some sort of weirdo. He says I came back home on my own. Biggest what I've ever experienced. My brother was freaked out to the max. Remembering the man's face, he was pale looking and bright white hair. In the house I grew up in, it always felt like you were being watched. I'd see shadows out of the corner of my eye and dark mists that would dissolve when you looked straight at them. My older sister was always scared of the attic, especially. She would barricade the door when we were left home alone. I went in the attic quite often to get various things. It's where we kept large toy containers, old clothes and stuffed animals, and I just liked seeing what I could find. It always felt like I was being watched, though. One time I went up there, and as I reached the top of the stairs, I saw a large, translucent alien-shaped white head looking at me from behind a box. I froze, terrified, and locked eyes with it for a few seconds before it slowly lowered itself down to hide. I turned right back around and left, telling myself I had imagined it, but scared to go in the attic for years after that. I didn't tell anyone for years. My parents eventually sold the house and we moved, and I've never felt the same way anywhere else I've lived. The very first hotel that I worked at, I started at the front desk and worked 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. shift. There was someone there with me from 2 p.m. to 10 p.m., so I always had a little more than an hour where I was alone at the desk. Our kitchen closed at 10 p.m., so usually by 10:15 p.m., it was only the bartender and I still there. One night, it was almost 11 p.m. and there was a huge noise that came from the kitchen area. The bartender and I ran back there and saw that every single pot, pan, ladle, spoon, everything else that was hanging from the ceiling racks, were on the ground. After our shift, we watched the camera back and there was no one in the kitchen when it happened. I have no explanation for it other than it was one of the scariest things that has ever happened to me and I could not get out of there fast enough. This is a true story. It happened about 7 years ago. The house was on the Colorado River, part of a gated community type thing. We were in the Cali desert. The old man found our house hours later because of our description and the buggy parked out front. He spent some time with us explaining his life story and describing his large family. He was, hopefully still is, a retired man living with his wife and dog in one of the neighboring communities and went out to adventure without telling his wife. No one even knew he was out there. He was really concerned with eventually telling his wife what really happened for obvious reasons. The dog broke a couple legs on the fall and he unsuccessfully attempted to rescue him, hence being trapped in a hole. I'm certainly no hero, just fortunate to be in the right place at the right time to help someone desperately in need. I will post a picture of the man and dog in the morning as I'm preparing for football kickoff. I was miles deep into the middle of the desert driving a dune buggy with friends and stopped to check out an abandoned mine that my buddy had explored in before. My buddy stayed behind while the girls and I went inside to look around. About 100 years into the mine, a man's voice calls out, "Help me please," along with strange whimpering noises. We all froze and stared at each other wide-eyed for a few seconds before the voice called out again and the girls took off running for the exit. I wanted to run too, but something was telling me it was my buddy playing a prank on us and I didn't want to fall for it. Convinced he was calling down from some sort of hole above, I called back and followed the voice, hoping for triumphance over his little joke. Instead I found an old man and his injured dog trapped deep down a 30-feet drop. Saved both their lives. I work at several attractions for the Big Mouse that has tourist destinations in Orlando and Anaheim. When I first started working for the Mouse, I learned that most of the buildings were haunted in one form or another. Generally, I take this stuff with a grain of salt. Show me the science or prove it to me, then I'll believe. I've had 2 separate encounters with 2 ghosts in 2 different attractions, and let me tell you, I believe a hell of a lot more now. Experience 1. In a slow-moving journey through time, you come across a scene where a famous painter is lying on his back, painting the ceiling of a building. There is a ladder going up to that scene, and the rumor was that a maintenance guy had a heart attack during his shift one night and dropped at the base of the ladder. No one found him until the next morning, and he was already dead. It became a tradition upon closing the ride for the night to tell him good night, or else havoc would come down upon the ride the next day. Silly, I know, but we all played along. I never really believed in it, everything seemed very circumstantial. On one particularly slow day, I was riding through the attraction when all of a sudden it stopped in that scene I mentioned earlier. Now, if you've ridden this ride, you'll know that it's basically a train car with 2 rows. Well, as far as I could see ahead of me, there was no one. As far as I could see behind me, there was no one. The ride system is pretty sophisticated. When someone hops out, there are pressure-sensitive mats on one side that trigger the ride to stop and show on our ride display screen exactly where it is. On the other side of the ride vehicle, there are photoelectric beams that also give the exact location of this intrusion, as we call them. Now we stop this ride pretty often. Someone takes too long to get into the ride vehicle, stop it and then start it back up again. Well, in this case, they started speaking over the intercom into the entire ride. That usually means someone is out of a vehicle somewhere on the ride. A few minutes into sitting there, I start to hear keys jingling, 2 sets headed in my direction. I'm completely alone, and here come my fellow Mouse employees, looking rather concerned. Iridescent song, did you jump out? Of course, I hadn't, to which I told them. They look at each other, and back at me, both looking from the opposite directions they've come from. Did you see anyone? I hadn't. It was just me. The mat and the I-beam were both triggered in this scene. We all sort of stare at each other and sort of whisper the ghost's name at each other. They leave, and within 5 minutes, we are moving again, but I never rode alone again. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more daily videos.